Ready for a change? Take the next step toward advancing your career with Kimball Recycling and Disposal. They are now hiring CDL drivers, mechanics, and other positions. Become part of a team that values your hard work and recognizes it with great rewards. Leave your dead-end job behind and drive towards a brighter future. Kimball Recycling and Disposal wants you, so don't miss out on this opportunity. Learn more and apply today at kimballcompanies.com. Kimball, recycling and disposal done right. Welcome to Talkin Trash, where we try to answer all your questions about recycling and proper waste disposal in Tuscarawas County. I'm your host, Hannah Hartman, and joining me is my go-to expert on all things recycling here in Tuscarawas County, my sister, Rachel Rodacher. Hi, Rachel. Rachel is a passionate advocate for recycling and sustainable practices. She's worked in our local recycling industry for several years, so her behind-the-scenes knowledge about how to recycle properly in Tuscarawas County is vast, and it's what will guide our ongoing discussions here on the Talkin Trash podcast. This episode is being recorded on April 16th, 2024, and because rules and regulations change over time, some of what we discuss may have changed by the time you hear this. But with that caveat, let's dumpster dive into this discussion. All right, Rachel, we always like to kind of just start with the basics in case somebody is just new to the podcast. So can you just quickly go over the basics of how to recycle properly in Tuscarawas County, meaning what items are acceptable?
Of course. I like to say to give someone a high five for recycling because there's 5 main categories. Sorry, I was late to that
Slow
one.
5.
There was 5 main categories of recyclable materials, which includes the glass bottles and jars, cardboard, paper, metal cans, and plastic bottles and jugs. Okay. And the reason I specify bottles and jars or bottles and jugs is, and we'll get more into this, but is that really anything that you can find at a grocery store, it might be okay for recycling, but anything outside of that, you might want to think twice. So maybe don't throw a window into the recycling.
Ooh, it's interesting you bring that up because just recently we posted a little quiz on the WJER Facebook page about that specific question. Like what, it was like, I think A, B, C, D, E, multiple choice, which of these is acceptable? We got a lot of variety of answers. So hopefully some of the people who might not have gotten the answer correct are tuning in for the Talkin Trash podcast because, it's, I think a lot of people think things are recyclable and they have the best intentions, but they may be mucking things up with some things that are not recyclable.
Yes,
so
it leads to what we call contamination, which is also on my list of our basics, which is simply when there's unacceptable items mixed into the acceptable items in a recycling bin.
Right.
So.
Yep. And, of course, we always want to reiterate those common terms that we hear a lot: reduce, reuse, recycle. But we also like to add repair, refuse, regift. So there's lots of re's that we can work into our entire recycling process, really.
Yes, and refuse will come up, I believe, later in this episode.
Okay,
well, stay tuned.
Stay tuned, yeah. And then we also like to mention about what we call the MRF, which is the Materials Recovery Facility. Think of it as a big, giant sorting machine, if you will, and it sorts all of those recyclable materials. It sorts out some of the contamination. It's a very interesting thing to see with your own eyes. We've talked about it on some previous episodes, but that's where everything basically goes if you throw it into your recycle bin, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's essentially, since many of the curbside programs are just commingled, all types together, the MRF's goal is to actually re-separate them all into the individual commodity types so that they can sell them to manufacturers to use again.
So when I say that's where everything goes, well, that's the first stop of where everything goes, right? So our next segment is called Where Does It Go, right? And so we like to zero in on a different type of material during each episode. So this time we want to talk about metals. So that would include aluminum, tin, steel, scrap metal, those types of things, right?
Yes.
Okay, so where does that ultimately end up then?
Well, luckily, I will say that metals are infinitely recyclable. So that means basically they can be recycled again and again and again without losing any of their structural integrity. So they can become new products. And what I found out is that mostly they become what they were in the first place or other like products. Like if you recycle a can, it likely will become another can.
Nice.
Primarily, it's because if you recycle your cans through a curbside program or a local public drop-off site, they're getting sent to a place that is going to work with manufacturers who are going to make the cans again. So they consider it one of the most closed loops of recycling because it truly, there's not a lot of waste and it's so much more energy. It takes so much less energy to produce from cans, like old cans, instead of getting new resources.
I gotcha.
Lining up new things. But yeah, typically, whether it's cans or appliances, cars, like any metal within it can be recycled again, either into new products that made of the same types of metals or into what they were, like cans.
Let me back up for a second because you said like cars and stuff like that. We don't want cars in our curbside recycle bin, right?
No. Okay. That's a good question. So really all we want, well, you would
you'd be surprised, right?
Yeah. Really what we want is just any kind of metal cans. So pop cans, cat food ones, people have asked us about that. Of course, they need to be cleaned out. They shouldn't have residual food waste in them. So that's a thing you should take note of because it can get very smelly at that MRF if you think about it with all the food waste that makes it. But pretty much anything else, any scrap metals, they should not go into a recycling bin, whether it be a public drop-off site or a curbside bin. Instead, they should go, you can work with a local scrap yard and actually still recycle it. They'll still recycle it, but that'll end up, sold to different people.
Yeah, so, this kind of is a perfect example of why we're even doing this podcast, Rachel, because I think anybody who is watching or listening to this already has an interest in trying to do the right thing. And maybe they just need some clarification because they thought they were doing the right thing. And then they realized that, like, really, I shouldn't be putting this in my recycle bin. So what we're trying to do here is not only help you understand what is actually recyclable, because as you said, scrap metal is recyclable, but you can't put it in one of those recycle bins or, one of the public drop-offs. You have to take it to a special event or a special site so that it gets recycled.
Yes.
And it can be a little confusing. So we're trying to help, eliminate some of that confusion.
Because what we would see is people throwing in a microwave and saying, well, there's glass and there's plastic and there's metal. That's all in the microwave. But it's like, no, it has to be handled specially and be deconstructed so that those things can be separated into categories. Plus, imagine something as big as a microwave getting jammed up in the sorting equipment at the MRF. Like, it's really the MRF. The equipment there is designed to handle cans or, We
want to take it easy on old MRF, right? We want to make the job easy for old MRF. So, okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. This is kind of leading into our next segment, which we call common questions. And, I say I'm always texting you, and I've probably texted you the same question 5 times in the last so many years, is this recyclable, with a picture of something? And
I probably
tell me over to well, perhaps, maybe the regulations change. But one thing that I know I've asked you about before, and I've seen this in a lot of recycling bins, and I can see why people think it is recyclable. It's one of these, okay? This is one of those tin serving trays. You might see at a catered event. You'd put some hot food in here with a little Bunsen burner kind of thing underneath it. And it is made of aluminum, right? So you think, well, it's aluminum. It's recyclable. Why can't I put this in my curbside recycling? What would you say?
Well, I would say that, again, think about the definition of recyclable. Yes, this is a type of recyclable product. That is the truth. But we have to look at where are you trying to recycle it, and where locally, and who's going to take it. So generally, these you should not put into a public drop-off site. Some curbside bins, I would say these probably aren't the best too. And the primary reason is, well, one, they don't fit that can shape we're looking for, which is what the equipment is designed to handle.
Cans, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
But also because typically, now this one that you're holding here is totally clean.
Yes. Not covered in sauce or anything like that.
I was going to say, typically they are very dirty and it's just hard to get them clean. We want that food waste. We don't want to contaminate the otherwise clean recyclables. So that's another reason they really don't want them. However, I was reading about how if you have clean and you really can't repurpose it and you're bound and determined to recycle it, I was reading specifically about tin foil. So kind of similarly that if you actually roll it into the shape of a can and make it, then it probably could get recycled.
Really?
But it's probably not the easiest thing to do. So what I usually say is, when in doubt, throw it out
Right.
if it's dirty. But if it's clean like that, I would reuse that. I reuse pans like that
sure.
if I can get them clean enough.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you're also reminding me of another kind of mantra of our local recycling area, which is clean, dry, and empty. You know, you mentioned that when you were talking about the cat food cans. Yeah, it takes a little bit of extra effort. It's another step. But again, if you're watching or listening to this podcast, you know, you're probably trying to do the right thing. So just take a few seconds, especially when you've just emptied something. Whatever was in there is still pretty liquidy. It hasn't like caked on there yet. So just rinse it out, let it dry for a little bit, then put it in your recycle bin.
And if you really don't want to do that, or you think it's a waste of water, which is something we've heard, I say then, okay, that's fine, but we don't want that in the recycle bin because it could.
So throw it out, right? Yeah. So, okay. Just trying to clarify things here. So, I guess we kind of hit on this with the aluminum serving trays, but also like you said, tinfoil pie pans, anything like that.
Yeah. Kind of the same reasons is that the equipment that sorts it out, because it is these big $1 million pieces of equipment. There also are individuals who help hand sort at the MRF, but their primary goal is to get out things that are going to jam up the equipment. So they're not going to sit and pick out every piece of tinfoil people try to send through. So if you see how the equipment, I encourage everyone to go to YouTube and look up materials recovery facility equipment and just look at it's wild. Because you'll see how everything's sorted, and really it's designed for very specific types of.
And it does help you understand much better why you shouldn't put something that you think in your head should be recyclable, but there was a reason it's not going to end up being recycled because of this process that it goes through.
Because ultimately, if it doesn't make it all the way through the end of the sorting, it just gets commingled with a bunch of stuff and it's trash. It
there you go.
Can't be reused.
Okay. And again, we're just trying to sort out what there is a market for. So you want the best materials, or I should say the end
we say quality over quantity is what we shifted to.
Which can be frustrating if you're somebody who really wants to recycle everything. But then I think you really just kind of have to turn more to the reusing and the re-gifting or whatever, you know, if you really can't recycle it, but you really want to.
Yes.
So. Okay. Well, so with that, why don't we go to our dumpster diving section? Okay. So this is where I just basically walk out into the parking lot to our recycling dumpster and see what I can find. Okay.
Just a warning to those at home. Don't jump into dumpsters.
I wouldn't recommend it. No.
You don't want to get dumped into a compacting trash.
Don't do that. No. I should say I don't dive into the dumpster. I just reach into the dumpster. Okay. And so today I found a couple of things. One of them I think is a little more obvious, but maybe not. Okay. So why don't we start with that one?
Okay.
It's actually really cute. A little wicker basket. I don't know why somebody would have thought this is recyclable. To me, again, this would be like, you could donate this, you know? It doesn't appear to be covered in goop or anything. You know, I don't know if somebody maybe thought they were throwing it away, but it's definitely not something that should go in the recycle bin.
No, and my guess would be maybe somebody thought, oh, this is made of wood. This is, this is compostable or something. But again, the recycling bin, not made for the compostables. And I would say this is likely very treated wood. So even if you did want to throw this in a compost pile, it's probably not going to break down.
So to me, that was kind of a more obvious one. But again, I can understand. I can understand why you don't want it to go in the trash, but it doesn't also go in the recycle bin. So just clarifying that. And then the other thing I found, and this is where I think there's maybe a little bit of nuance we can discuss. Okay. It's like there was this says water softener pellets. Okay. So, but it has like a little plastic handle. It is a plastic bag. And we did talk about plastic bags on a previous episode, but just kind of reiterate the points we made there.
Well, definitely a no-no for a curbside or a public drop-off bin, primarily because any kind of plastic, they would say film or plastic bags, are considered a tangler at the MRF. So they can't really get sorted out. And not only that, but they can end up in costly shutdowns of the equipment when they get all tangled around, just like think of hair on a vacuum cleaner roller. That's kind of what happens with plastic bags. So that's part of it. The second part is it is different types of plastics, so mixed material. So anytime you see something, cartons are a good example of this. Cartons maybe have broth in them or things like that, milk cartons. They're not solely cardboard, or they're not there's plastic layers in them. Those are mixed. And so that is not ideal because we want individual commodities sorted out.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up, because I don't think we've hit on the mixed materials point in any of our previous episodes. Like, yeah, if you're kind of like what you said about the microwave, it's got plastic, it's got copper, it's got all these different components. Well, that right there will tell you it does not go in the
Unless
recycle
you
bin.
can take it all into its different components.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Or you would take it somewhere of an event or a place where they would do that for you. But yeah, mixed materials, don't even bother putting them in the recycle bin, pretty much, right?
No.
Is there any exceptions to that rule if you can think of?
Again, the timing of this episode right now, they're not really saying, throw cartons in there. But cartons are a good example of one where if the market's really high, sometimes they will tell us, go ahead and throw them in there, because the way who we're selling it to, they don't, whatever it's becoming. In that case, I'm not positive what's becoming, but whatever it's becoming, it can withstand a degree of, I would say, contamination or mixed materials within it. But yeah, right now none of the examples, none of our 5 categories really want anything mixed in with that. Another good example of something people get confused about is like wrapping paper. Like if you truly have all paper, wrapping paper, that's considered recyclable.
Paper. Yeah.
But some of it has foil decoration or plastic,
tape.
Tape is not recyclable, but the way that they pulp up the paper and stuff, usually
it would be okay.
A lot gets.
Well, I'm glad we actually brought that up, because that is something I think about before I am somebody who I kind of collect the wrapping paper during a holiday. And a lot of times I'll sit there and pull the tape off, but I don't really need to necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, many of the paper mills, of course, they want the cleanest product. So if you want to help them, then you should definitely do as much as you can.
Try to be helpful.
On shipping boxes and stuff, if there's a little tape, they've told us, or an envelope, like a window envelope, they've said, oh, no, that pretty much gets sorted out. So,
yeah, I remember asking you that one. Well, you
I had to
researched it, but so if you get like a business envelope with a little window so you can see the address, you can recycle that.
Yep. Yeah. They say that they can get it all out of there. Now, again, standards could change, but right now,
as of today. Okay. Well, that brings us to our What's the Word section. And this time we want to talk about greenwashing. So a lot of people have probably heard this term, but for anybody who might not know what that means.
It's a form of advertising in which green marketing is deceptive. Like they deceptively use it to persuade the public that company's policies or that the products themselves are more environmentally friendly than they are. Yeah. So even just the buzzwords of green on a package or sustainable on a package, they're not regulated terms. So you have to always be leery if you see something that seems like it's really trying to convince you that it's eco-friendly. Yeah. You have to kind of do some homework if you're truly trying to figure out how eco-friendly it is. It can take the form of either, again, misleading labels on packages or environmental imagery showing up when it's not really even related to what the product is for. They're just trying to get the green vote, essentially. Right, yeah. Also, they talk about how there's a trade-off. Like some companies, maybe that product itself, there's a green element to it. It's made of 100% recycled, whatever. However, if you look at the production of the product, what was the environmental impact like in producing it? So are they only trying to focus on this one little element when there's this trade-off over here? So that's another form.
You might not be getting the whole story, right? So it can be, it's definitely, somebody who cares about that, it can definitely be very frustrating for me. Because, you're in a sense, you're trying to vote with your dollars. So you want to support companies that do good things and have good practices. But the unfortunate reality is, like you said, there's a lot of things that just are unregulated in terms of what you can say and the info you can put out there. So you can't necessarily just take somebody at their word. And it can be hard to do deep dive research on some of this stuff. So
it can be. I mean, a good example of what I would consider greenwashing in this sense is the chasing arrows symbol. Sometimes people just throw that on there just to give the appearance that it's either recyclable or had, materials in it that were made with recycled, but it's not regulated. So someone could just throw that on there just to get you thinking, this is safe to buy. So.
Try to do your research as best you can.
Yes, and consider the main things to consider. Do your research when you can. Just vote with your dollar, like you said. Try to learn more, do better. Yeah. But consider a product's whole life cycle. That is the most important thing. That plagues me all the time because every single thing that you produce, even if you try to recycle it, there's an end life to every product. Yeah. I mean, other than metals, I guess. They're infinitely recyclable.
I guess. Yeah.
That's one. But glass is infinitely recyclable too. But regardless, like eventually something, even if you tried to always donate your things, it's always going to end up broken at some point beyond repair. Yeah. So try to be cognizant of the whole entire life cycle of a product before you purchase it.
I think the thing that drives me the craziest is like single-use products, right? Like if that thing does not dissolve into thin air when you're done with it, and it's a single-use thing, it's instant trash, you know? So, so just try to do the best you can, I guess is the best advice we can give. But, and to that point, let's move on to our segment called Simple Substitutes. And this is such a simple one. And my purse is not sitting near me, but I have this in my purse. A reusable straw. It's so simple. I don't know.
I say the refuse comes into because people, it is the default. I know that they had changed this at a local restaurant that I used to go to. They had for a while switched so that they weren't offering straws unless you asked for them. But eventually I noticed they switched back. So I think people were complaining, but it is funny to me. So if they're going to offer you the thing, that's what that's part of the process. Yeah. So to refuse a straw, I think I have done this before at like drive-thrus and stuff. I'm like, I don't need a straw. I've got one. And yeah, it's just, well, you do, but some people are like, oh, okay. You know, so it can go either way. And I think ultimately you just, if you carry one with you and you want to just do that simple substitute, you're probably not going to care that much if you get a look from somebody. But, well, yeah. And ultimately it's like, assess too. Do you need the straw to drink that? Some people need a straw to drink certain things, or a thick milkshake, or
definitely
you're driving, so you.
And my thing, I prefer straws, and so I legitimately feel bad if I don't have my reusable straw and I end up using a plastic straw. But like when ice clinks against my teeth, so like it is simply a preference thing. I don't technically need a straw, but I do prefer it, and so that's why I felt it was my eco responsibility to just carry my own with me and try to use it as much as I can.
Well, yeah. And if you really are, like I did notice, hopefully they'll do it again this year, but like last year at Tuscarawas Park, they were actually using paper straws, which I actually am much more in favor of paper straws than their plastic counterpart, because at least they will biodegrade. And usually when you're getting a drink at a place like that, you're going to drink it so quick that it won't matter that the paper eventually does start to become soggy.
Yeah, because people will say, well, they don't hold up as well. Well, that's the point, because they dissolve, right? So, okay, so that is a very simple substitute. Now we'll move on to our last segment, which is the good news. And as I mentioned at the beginning, that we are recording this on April 16th, which means next week is Earth Week. Yep. Earth Day is on Monday, and actually Arbor Day is on Friday. So it's just a whole Earth Week. And, you may have... Every year you might kind of hear a little bit of the history of Earth Day, but I always kind of need that refresher. I hear about it once a year, and I'm like, I think it was in the 70s. So can you give us our little background on Earth Day?
Yes, it was first observed on Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970. Okay. And they say it exceeded the expectations. They just kind of proposed it. And then over 20 million Americans supposedly participated in the first Earth Day, whether that be, they said, teach-ins or rallies, local cleanup events, just different ways that people did it. One of the events that led up to Earth Day was actually pretty local here, which was, we say in our backyard, the Cuyahoga River fire. So in 1969, the Cuyahoga River had caught fire because it had so many toxins in it, and a passing by train ignited the fire. So because of how successful Earth Day was and these pressing environmental issues, the EPA actually was established a year after the first Earth Day. So we consider it good news because we're still celebrating Earth Day, so that's good. People cared enough about their environment to start it and participate all those years ago, and now here we are celebrating it so many years later. And there's so many different ways you can participate, and local people doing great things on Earth Day. But even if you're just looking for something to do and not as part of an organized thing, it's like, hey, you could just pick up litter if you go on your dog walk.
Every day is Earth Day.
Yeah, just pick up the litter. Or I know you didn't create it. That's always a hang up of mine. No, the people, they should clean up. They're not going to.
I live on a busy street, and so I find cigarette butts and, fast food cups and straw. I find all kinds of stuff. And I think to myself, I shouldn't have to clean this up. This isn't my trash. But you know what? whoever threw it out their window ain't coming back to clean it up. So every once in a while, I put on a pair of gloves, get a little plastic bag, go out and clean it up. And
you're the one that has to look at it.
Well, it's my property, so nobody's going to clean it for me. And you mentioned like picking up litter and whatever. I just have to throw this out there because for a while, I've gotten out of the habit. Since Earth Day's coming up, maybe I'll get back into the habit. But for a while, I heard the term plog, meaning pick up litter while jogging, is kind of how that was, what that was supposed to stand for. A little bit clunky, but I get it. And so I used to have this idea of like, well, you could plog with a dog, meaning you could like walk your dog and like pick up litter while you do it. And then for a while I did. I had like a reusable bag with like a little trash can in it. I actually had 2 little trash cans in it. So when I would pick things up, if it was a recyclable, I'd put it in one. Yeah. And trust me, if something looks really scary, I'm not going to pick it up, but I would wear a glove, so I'm not picking it up with my bare hands. But yeah, I would pick a lot of, just cans and little pieces of paper. I mean, a lot of times it wasn't even anything too crazy, but it's just, when you walk the same, like I tend to walk the same routes with my dog, and I'd be like, I don't want to look at this trash anymore. So I just kind of took it upon myself and started picking stuff up. Like I said, kind of got out of the habit. Maybe I'll reignite it here. This maybe that's the good news.
There's your good news. There's your Earth Day. Okay. Other people's goals might be different, but some of the other examples we always talk about, obviously, like conserving water where you can. It doesn't seem as important here in Ohio because we have a lot of water, but other places, not as much. Think about your diet. I thought this one was an interesting one because right now the cost of food. Think about how a third of the food generally becomes food waste. Like, it's crazy. So if you also want to save money, then start being more cognizant of how much you're buying, what you're using it for.
And it's funny to me, like, it kind of blows my mind how many people like won't eat leftovers. I kind of like, I understand that it's not as fresh. It might have lost some of that initial really good taste, but to me, if I've got half of a meal left over from the night before, well, there's lunch the next day. So not only did I not have to waste any energy or whatever preparing it, it did not go in the trash. I didn't have to make something new, and pretty good.
And a lot of local places give you so much for your money that it's really a lot more than one portion anyway.
Definitely.
Yeah, so think about things like that for Earth Day, as well as, literally planting trees or planting native plants. That's so helpful for local
pollinators.
Yeah, that's kind of all the things on my list. Reduce, reuse, and recycle, of course, and swap out if you have harmful pesticides, but you can use chemical-free alternatives. That's another thing people think of on Earth Day. So
I'll just throw this out there because I know I've done this before with, like, instead of using a chemical weed killer, I've mixed like vinegar, dish soap. Maybe there was one other thing, or maybe just hot water. Maybe like it was very simple, non-toxic, but it kills the weeds. So and when you have close neighbors, we've run into this where if your neighbor is using chemicals, that can affect your lawn, whether or not they mean for it to. And so be aware of how close you are, what you're using, and if it's affecting your neighbors. It's one thing if it's only affecting you, but when you start...
We're all neighbors on this one planet,
on Earth, right? Well, and again, since we're recording this before Earth Day, but it might not air until after Earth Day, just consider everyday Earth Day. Do something friendly for the Earth, and it'll probably make you feel better, I would imagine.
A little bit goes a long way. I know it's easy to get discouraged when we talk about recycling as a whole and the recycling industry, but try to think smaller.
But Rachel, the future's so bright, you had to wear shades, right? All right. Anything else you want to share on today's episode of Talkin Trash?
Well, the last thing I was going to add, because I forgot to say when we were talking about metal, but it was basically that pretty much, according to the International Aluminum Institute, is that it said about 75% of the aluminum that's been ever produced in history is still in use in circulation today. Is, again, consider the source, the International Aluminum Association. Of course, they're going to say that, but still, I mean, I can imagine why. Infinitely recyclable. It's easy to sort out. Metals are easier to. So conversely, they say that the majority of plastic ever produced is,
here to stay, pretty much, right? And not necessarily and not necessarily being reused. It's just there.
It's just buried because apparently, like 91% of plastic doesn't end up getting recycled, and even what does can only be recycled once or twice before it, the integrity of it is. So plastic is really the enemy. But.
Okay. Well, but we'll end on that good news, which is aluminum is infinitely recyclable, and we're still using the same stuff we started with pretty much. So that's great. Well, Rachel, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Talkin Trash. We'll do this again. So stay tuned to WJER. We'll have lots more information about how to recycle properly in Tuscarawas County. This has been Talkin Trash. I'm Hannah Hartman for WJER Radio.